It was minus 14 degrees outside, the kind of cold that doesn't just bite, it swallows you whole. Snow wasn't falling, it was flying sideways like the sky itself was angry, and standing in the middle of it, in a corporate parking lot in Incheon, South Korea, was a woman named Yoon Seo-yoon. No coat, no gloves, no phone. Just a thin office blouse and a pencil skirt and shoes that were never designed to touch snow. Her boss, director Hwang Jae-sung, had locked the glass office door behind her 60 seconds ago. He told her to find a client file she never lost. Told her not to come back until it was in her hands. Then he turned his back, walked to his desk, picked up his coffee, and laughed. Two junior employees watched through the glass. Neither moved, neither spoke. The security guard at the side entrance looked at Seo-yoon through the small window in his booth. He looked away. Then he looked back. His hand hovered near the door handle, but he didn't open it. Not yet. And Seo-yoon just stood there, still, quiet, hands at her sides, not shaking, not crying, not banging on the door, begging to be let back in. She just stood in the snow like a woman who had been through worse, like a woman who knew that cold was not the most dangerous thing in the world. People were. But here's what Director Hwang didn't know. Here's what nobody in that building could have known. 22 minutes ago, before Seo-yoon's body temperature started dropping, before her lips began turning blue, before the frost started forming on her eyelashes, a silent alarm had been triggered. Not by the building's security system, not by the police, by a private network that spans 3 countries and operates in places that don't appear on any map. A network built for one purpose only, to monitor the safety of one single person on this entire earth. And that person was standing in a parking lot in Incheon, freezing, because Yoon Seo-yoon was not who her employment file said she was. She was not an orphan with no connections. She was not a quiet secretary with a blank history and an empty past. And the man who still had her name tattooed in black ink across his chest had just been informed 7 seconds ago that she was in danger. Director Hwang Jae-sung had done many terrible things to many powerless people in his career. But today, for the first time, he had picked the wrong one. Before everything collapses on Director Hwang, only hit that subscribe button and like this video right now, because what pulls up to that parking lot in 22 minutes will give you chills. 6 months earlier, a woman walked into a staffing agency in Incheon and filled out an application for a secretarial position. She listed her name as Yoon Seo-yoon, age 27, education, high school diploma only, work history scattered, a restaurant hostess in Busan for 8 months, a filing clerk in Daegu for a year, a gap of 14 months with no explanation. Under emergency contacts, she wrote none. The recruiter barely looked at her. A woman with no degree, no network, no references, and no family was barely worth the paper her resume was printed on. But a mid-level import/export company on the edge of Incheon's industrial district needed a secretary. Han and Seo-yoon was willing to start immediately at a salary that was 30% below standard. So the recruiter made the call, the company signed the contract, and 3 days later, Yoon Seo-yoon walked through the front door of Hanjin Global Logistics for the first time. She was assigned a desk near the back of the open plan office. No window, no partition, just a metal desk, a chair with a broken armrest, and a computer that took 4 minutes to boot up. She was given a stack of filing to do on her first morning that would have taken most people 2 full days. She finished it by lunch. Nobody noticed. On her second day, she reorganized the client database that had been a mess for over a year. She cross-referenced shipping manifests with customs filings and flagged 12 discrepancies that the logistics team had missed. She printed a summary, left it on the operations manager's desk. No note, no name. Nobody thanked her. By the end of her first week, Seo-yoon had become what she clearly intended to become: invisible. She arrived early. She left late. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her answers were short and precise, and delivered with the kind of calm that made people forget she was in the room 5 minutes after she left it. But there were things about her that didn't quite fit. Small things, things that only a very careful observer would notice. On her first day, she walked the entire building before sitting down. Every floor, every corridor, every stairwell. She noted the locations of all 11 security cameras, and she never stood directly beneath any of them. She identified the three exits that weren't marked on the building directory: the loading dock, the rooftop access stairwell, and a service door behind the maintenance closet on the second floor. She never sat with her back to an entrance. Not once. Not in the office. Not in the break room. Not in the cafeteria. She always chose the chair that faced the door. She carried no phone. She paid for everything in cash. She never gave anyone a personal detail that could be verified, traced, or used to find her. These are not the habits of a secretary. These are the habits of someone who has been hunted. But nobody noticed, because people see what they expect to see. And what they expected to see in Yoon Seo-yoon was exactly what she showed them. A quiet, forgettable woman with no past and no future worth asking about. Now, Inna, the man who made her life inside that building a living hell. Director Hwang Jae-sung was 46 years old. He ran the operations division of Hanjin Global Logistics, not because he was qualified, but because his wife's uncle owned 40% of the company. He got his title through a dinner table conversation and a handshake. He kept it by making sure everyone beneath him was too afraid to challenge him. Hwang was the kind of man who confused cruelty with authority. He believed that fear was the same thing as respect. And because nobody above him cared enough to correct that belief, he operated like a small king in a small kingdom, untouched and untouchable. He noticed Seo-yoon on her third day, not because of her work, because of her silence. In Hwang's world, quiet people were either hiding something or too weak to speak. Either way, they were targets. It started small. He gave her tasks that weren't hers. He made her fetch his lunch from a restaurant 3 blocks away in the rain. He had her retype a 40-page report because he didn't like the font, then told her the original font was better and made her retype it again. When clients visited the office, Hwang introduced his team by name. Every member, except Seo-yoon. She stood in the room while he pretended she didn't exist. Once, when a client asked who she was, Hwang laughed and said, "She's temporary. Don't bother learning the name." Behind her back, he called her the orphan. He thought it was funny. His deputy thought it was funny. The junior staff didn't laugh, but they didn't object either. Silence is its own kind of permission. And through all of it, every cruel joke, every impossible deadline, every public humiliation, Seo-yoon did nothing. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She didn't quit. She absorbed it the way a wall absorbs rain, quietly, completely, without cracking. But late one night, alone in the office, long after everyone else had gone home, Seo-yoon sat at her desk and opened her wallet. Inside, hidden behind a transit card she never used, was a photograph, worn at the edges, creased down the middle. It showed 2 hands intertwined. No faces, no background, just a man's hand holding hers. His knuckles were scarred. Her fingers were laced between his like they had been made to fit there. She stared at that photograph for a long time, and whatever she was feeling in that moment, it wasn't weakness. It was restraint. Everyone in that office saw a quiet secretary with no past. But Seo-yoon didn't have no past. She had the kind of past that makes people disappear on purpose. Now let's talk about the day everything broke. December 19th, a Wednesday. The forecast had warned of a severe cold front moving in from the northwest. -14 degrees with wind chill dropping to -20 by late afternoon. Schools were closing early. The city government issued an advisory telling people to stay indoors. The kind of day where even the stray dogs in Incheon find shelter. Inside Hanjin Global Logistics, the office was running on half staff. Most of the senior team had left early, but Director Hwang was still there because he had a client call at 3:30 and he needed his coffee refilled and his ego maintained until then. At 2:45, Hwang walked to his desk and opened the third drawer on the right side. He was looking for the Yosu Maritime client file, a 200-page contract package that was due for review the next morning. It wasn't there. He checked the second drawer. Not there. He checked his briefcase, his cabinet, his deputy's desk. Not there. Now Hwang knew that Seo-yoon had been the last person to handle that file. He'd given it to her the previous afternoon and told her to make 3 copies and return the original to his desk. She had done exactly that. She placed the original in his third drawer at 4:17 p.m. the previous day. She remembered the exact time because she remembered everything. But the file wasn't there now, which meant someone else had moved it. Most likely his deputy, who had a habit of grabbing files from Huang's desk without logging them. Huang didn't investigate. He didn't check with his deputy. He didn't ask anyone else in the office. He did what he always did when something went wrong. He found the easiest person to blame. He walked to Seo Yun's desk, stood over her, and in a voice loud enough for the entire office to hear, he said, "Where is the Yosu file?" "I returned it to your third drawer yesterday at 4:17, she said calmly. "It's not there. I can help you look for it if you lost it. You lost a 200-page client file worth 600 million won. Do you understand what that means?" "Director Huang, I placed it exactly where—" "Get out." The office went quiet. Not the productive kind of quiet, the holding your breath kind. "Excuse me?" Seo Yun said. "I should get out of this building. Go find that file, and don't come back until it's in your hands. The file is in this building. If you'll allow me to—" "Out now." Seo Yun looked at him, a look that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but carried the weight of every humiliation she had swallowed in 6 months. Then she stood up, pushed her chair in, walked to the coat closet to retrieve her jacket. It was locked. Huang had the only key. He made no move to open it. She turned to face him. He stared back, daring her to ask for the key, daring her to show weakness. She didn't ask. She turned and walked to the glass front door, pushed it open, stepped into -14 degrees wearing nothing but her office clothes. The door closed behind her. The automatic lock clicked, and Director Huang Jaisung picked up his coffee, took a sip, first sat down at his desk, and smiled. Through the glass, Seo Yun stood in the parking lot. Snow was already settling on her shoulders. The wind cut through her blouse like it wasn't there. She wrapped her arms around herself, not for warmth. There was no warmth to be had. It was just the body's reflex, the last mechanical act of self-preservation before the mind takes over. And her mind did take over, because Seo Yun was not processing this the way a secretary processes being locked out in the cold. She was calculating. How long before her core temperature dropped below 35 degrees? How far to the nearest heated structure, a convenience store 4 blocks south? How long she could maintain motor function in her hands and feet before frostbite became irreversible? This is not how normal people think. This is how someone trained in survival thinks. Someone who has been in worse situations than a parking lot in a snowstorm. Someone who once lived in a world where cold was the least of your problems. 15 minutes passed. Her lips turned blue. Her fingertips lost feeling. The security guard, Bae Jung-ho, a 53-year-old man who had worked the front gate for 11 years and never once been thanked for it, finally opened the side door. He walked out with his own jacket, a thin padded thing that smelled like cigarette smoke and hand warmth. "Please," he said, holding it out. "At least take this." Seo Yun looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, her mask slipped. Something human and tired and grateful flickered across her face. Then it was gone. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I'll be fine." She wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Jung-ho put the jacket around her shoulders anyway. She didn't resist this time. He went back inside to call the building manager to override the front door lock. But the building manager was at home and not answering his phone because the city advisory had told everyone to stay indoors. Inside the office, Huang glanced through the glass. Seo Yun was still standing there. He registered her the way you register a piece of furniture. Present but irrelevant. He went back to preparing for his client call. "And now I need to tell you about what was happening 600 miles away. Because while Seo Yun was standing in that parking lot, counting the minutes until her body started shutting down, a different kind of cold was moving through the streets of Seoul. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather, and everything to do with the man who was about to receive the worst notification of his evening. 47 floors below street level in a building in Gangnam that doesn't appear on any city registry, there is a room. The room has no windows. The walls are lined with monitors, 16 of them, each cycling through different feeds. Some show financial data, some show satellite imagery, some show live security footage from locations across East Asia. In the center of the room sits a man named Park Da-jun, 34 years old, black suit, no tie, A face that could be handsome if it ever relaxed, but it never does. His hands are folded on the desk in front of him. His posture is the kind of still that most people can't achieve even in sleep. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't tap his fingers. He doesn't check his phone. He simply exists in the room with the same energy as the walls. Permanent, unmovable, absolute. Park Dajin runs the Gyeomjongpa. If you've never heard that name, that's by design. It's not the kind of organization that wants headlines. It started 3 generations ago in the shipyards of Busan, a dock workers collective that evolved into a protection network, then a logistics empire, then something that sits between legitimate business and a shadow state. They operate in Seoul, Busan, Tokyo, and 3 territories in Southeast Asia. They don't traffic drugs. They don't deal in weapons. They deal in leverage, information, access, and the unspoken understanding that some problems can only be solved by people who don't exist on paper. Dajin didn't inherit this. He built it. Yet he took a fracturing organization and restructured it from the ground up. Not with violence, though he's capable of it, with precision, with patience, with an intelligence that makes the people around him feel like they're always 2 steps behind, because they are. People don't fear Park Dajin because he's dangerous. They fear him because he remembers everything, every favor, every betrayal, every debt. His memory is a ledger that never closes. And his patience is the most terrifying thing about him, because a man who can wait 10 years to settle a score is a man you can never truly escape. At 8:17 p.m., Dojin's second-in-command walked into the room. His name was No Chijung, 31, former military intelligence. The kind of man who can disassemble a firearm or a financial statement with equal efficiency. He served Dajin not out of obligation, but out of the closest thing to loyalty that men in this world are capable of. Chijung placed a tablet on Dajin's desk without a word. On the screen was a thermal satellite image. Overhead view, a commercial building in Incheon, and in the parking lot, a single heat signature, a human body, standing alone. The thermal reading showed a surface temperature that was dropping fast, too fast. Beneath the image was a biometric match notification, 99.7% facial recognition confidence. A name flashed at the bottom of the screen, Yoon Seo Yoon. Dojin's hands didn't move. His posture didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted, like a door opening in a house that had been sealed shut for years. Not anger, not panic. Something older than both. Was something that lived in the marrow of his bones and had been waiting, quietly for exactly this moment. Now I need to explain something. When Seo Yoon left 3 years ago, when she walked out of Dojin's life and disappeared into a new identity in a new city, Dajin did not chase her. He didn't send men after her. He didn't track her phone or intercept her mail or station someone outside her door. Because she asked him not to. And Park Dajin, for all the things he was capable of, was incapable of violating a promise he made to her. But he did one thing. One single thing that she never knew about. He built a passive monitoring system. Not surveillance, not tracking, a tripwire, a biometric-linked protocol connected to facial recognition databases in 3 countries, South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, or tied to emergency medical networks and satellite thermal imaging grids. The system wasn't designed to find her. It was designed to know if she was ever in danger. For 3 years, the system was silent. 36 months of nothing, of green lights and empty alerts. 36 months of Dojin sitting in this room, running an empire, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, while a part of him, a part he never showed anyone, listened for a signal that never came. Until tonight. Chisung stood at the edge of the desk. He'd already pulled the data. External temperature in Incheon, minus 14 degrees Celsius. Wind chill, minus 20. Duration of exposure based on satellite timestamps, 19 minutes and counting. Subject's thermal signature indicated early-stage hypothermia. She's been standing outside a commercial building for 19 minutes, Chisung said. No protective clothing. External temperature, minus 14. Her core temperature is dropping. Dojin looked at the screen, at the tiny dot of heat in a field of blue cold. The woman he had spent 3 years not looking for was standing in a snowstorm, and she was alone. He asked one question, the only question that mattered to him. Who put her outside? Chi Sung pulled up the building's corporate registry. Hanjin Global Logistics. Operations Director, Huang Jai-sung. Employment records, personal records, financial records. Everything there was to know about this man was on that tablet in under 90 seconds, because the Gyeomjongpa's information network doesn't have gaps. Dajin read the screen for 11 seconds. Then he stood up. He buttoned his coat and walked toward the door. He didn't give an order. He didn't need to. Chizung was already on his phone. Within 4 minutes, 12 vehicles were moving. Black SUVs, no plates, no insignia. Professional drivers who knew the fastest route from Gangnam to Incheon at this hour and in these conditions. 47 minutes if they obeyed traffic laws. 31 if they didn't. They didn't. But before I tell you what happened when that convoy arrived, you need to understand who Seo Yun was to Dajin. Not what she was. Who she was. Because this isn't a story about a powerful man rescuing a helpless woman. Seo Yun was never helpless, and Dojin was never her savior. What they were to each other is something far more complicated and far more dangerous. They met 7 years ago. Seo Yun was 20. Dojin was 27, and the circumstances of their meeting were not romantic. They were transactional. Seo Yun's father was a man named Yoon Pilgyu, a small-time shipping broker in Busan who made a living connecting cargo companies with port access. He wasn't a criminal, but he existed in the gray space between legal and illegal commerce, the space where men like Dojin operate, and Pilgyu had made a mistake. He'd borrowed money from an associate of the Gyeomjongpa to cover a failed shipping contract. 300 million won. He couldn't pay it back. The associate wanted enforcement. Dojin was sent to handle it. That was his role at 27. Before he ran the organization, before he rebuilt it, he was the one they sent when conversations needed to end and consequences needed to begin. He drove to Pilgyu's apartment in a crumbling residential block in Busan-jinggu. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray sky. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and mildew. He knocked on the door expecting to find a man ready to beg or run. Instead, the door opened and a 20-year-old woman stood in the frame. Thin, sharp-eyed, no makeup. Hair pulled back with a rubber band. She was wearing a second-hand sweater 3 sizes too big and a pair of slippers that had been repaired with tape. She looked at Dajin, at his black coat, at his build, at the energy he carried, the kind of energy that makes hallways feel smaller and exits feel farther away. She read him instantly. She knew exactly what he was, and she didn't move. "My father isn't here," she said. "He left 4 days ago. I don't know where he is, and I wouldn't tell you if I did." Dojin studied her. She was scared. He could see it in the tension in her jaw and the slight tremor in her left hand. But she was standing in the doorway like a locked gate. "I'm here to collect a debt," he said. "I know what you're here for. Look around. There's nothing to collect. Take whatever is in this apartment if you want, but you walk through me first." She meant it. He could tell. This woman with tape on her slippers and nothing in her refrigerator was going to physically block a man twice her size from entering her home. Not because she thought she could stop him, but because surrender wasn't in her vocabulary. Dajin didn't walk through her. He stepped back, leaned against the hallway wall, and he sat down on the concrete floor, right there in that mildew-scented corridor. He crossed his legs and looked up at her and said, "Then I'll wait." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Wait for what?" "I don't know yet." He stayed for 3 hours. She didn't close the door. She didn't call anyone. She stood in the doorway for the first 40 minutes, then sat on the threshold, then eventually brought out 2 cups of instant coffee, because in her words, "If you're going to sit in my hallway like a stray dog, you might as well drink something." They talked, not about the debt, not about her father. They talked about the building, about the landlord who never fixed the heating, about the woman on the 3rd floor who sang opera at midnight, about the stray cat that lived on the roof that Seo Yun fed every morning, even though she could barely feed herself. Dajin left that evening without collecting anything. He returned the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Each time he sat in the hallway, each time she brought coffee, each time the conversations got longer, and the silences between them got more comfortable. He paid off her father's debt himself, quietly, without telling her. When she found out 3 weeks later, she confronted him in the hallway with a fury he had never seen in anyone. "I didn't ask for your charity." "It wasn't charity, it was a business decision. Your father's debt was inefficient. Collecting it would have cost more than it was worth." "That's a lie." "Yes." She stared at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled. Just barely. Just at the corners. But it was the most honest expression Dajin had ever seen on another human face. That was how it started. Not with romance, not with attraction, with recognition. Two people who had spent their entire lives being seen as functions. Him as a weapon, her as a burden, suddenly seeing each other as human beings. Their relationship grew slowly. Seo Yun was the only person in Dojin's life who used his first name. No title, no honorific, just Dajin. She was the only person who argued with him, who told him when he was wrong, who laughed at him, genuinely laughed, when he tried to be intimidating with her and failed. She didn't love him because of his power. She loved him in spite of it. She loved the version of him that sat on concrete floors and drank instant coffee. Hana, the version that read poetry at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. The version that once carried a stray cat 6 blocks in the rain because she asked him to. And he loved her the way a man loves the first person who ever made him feel like he could put the armor down. Completely. Terrifyingly. In the way that rewires your entire operating system and makes every previous version of yourself feel like a rough draft. For 3 years they were together, not publicly. The Jeomjongpa's world doesn't allow for public vulnerability. But within the walls of their private life, they were more real with each other than either of them had ever been with anyone. Then someone tried to kill her. A rival syndicate, one that had been losing territory to the Jeomjongpa for over a year. They decided that the fastest way to destabilize Park Dojin was not to attack his operations. It was to attack his heart. They sent 2 men to the apartment where Seo Yun was staying. It was a Tuesday night. She was alone. She heard them at the door before they broke through it. She went out the window. Fire escape. 3 stories. In the dark. In the rain. She survived. A fractured wrist. A scar on her left wrist that she would carry for the rest of her life. And a realization that settled in her chest like a stone. She was his vulnerability. As long as she existed in his world, she was a target. Not because she was weak. Because he loved her. And love, in the world of men like Dojin, is the one thing your enemies will always use against you. 3 days after the attack, Seo Yun sat across from Dojin in a safe house in Mapogu. His men had dismantled the rival syndicate's leadership in 48 hours. The 2 men who had come for her were no longer a problem. The threat was neutralized. But Seo Yun wasn't looking at the situation tactically. She was looking at it honestly. "This will happen again," she said. "I won't let it. You can't control everything, Dojin. You know that. Next time they won't send 2 men. They'll send 5. Or they'll use a bomb. Or they'll wait until I'm somewhere your people can't reach in time. Then I'll restructure. You'll what? Build me a cage? Surround me with guards every hour of every day? That's not a life. That's a prison." Silence. "I love you," she said, "but I can't be the weapon they use against you. And I won't be the reason you build walls so high that you can't see over them anymore." She left the next morning. New identity, new city, no phone, no contact, no forwarding address. She asked him one thing before she walked out the door. "Don't follow me, please." He didn't follow her, because she asked, and because Park Dojin's love was not the kind that captures. It was the kind that holds its breath and lets go, even when letting go feels like bleeding out. But he built the tripwire, the silent monitoring system. Not to follow her, not to find her, just to know. Just to be certain that if the world ever turned against her again, he would know, and he would come. For 3 years, the system was silent. Until a man named Hwang Jae-sung decided to throw a woman into a snowstorm for a file that was sitting in his deputy's 3rd drawer. And now 12 black SUVs were cutting through the frozen night, heading toward Incheon at 160 kilometers per hour. And inside the lead vehicle, Park Dojin sat in the back seat with his hands folded and his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't speak for the entire drive. Chizung, sitting beside him, knew better than to break the silence. Because the silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of 3 years of waiting, 3 years of restraint, 3 years of loving a woman from a distance so great that it felt like loving a star you could see but never touch. And now someone had put her in the cold. Director Hwang Jae-sung had done many cruel things in his life. He'd fired single mothers. He'd humiliated interns. He'd stolen credit from people who couldn't fight back. But this time, he'd made a mistake he couldn't undo. He'd put his hands on the one person the Korean underworld considered untouchable. If you can already feel what's about to happen to Director Hwang, drop the word justice in the comments right now, because the next part of this story is going to hit different. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. 22 minutes. That's how long Yoon Seo-yoon stood in that parking lot. By the 20-minute mark, her body had moved past shivering. That's the dangerous stage. When you're cold, your body shivers to generate heat. When you're too cold, it stops. The muscles give up. The body starts making choices about what to save and what to sacrifice. Fingers first, then toes, then ears. The blood retreats to the core, like an army pulling back to defend the capital. Everything at the edges goes dark and numb. The security guard, Bae Jung-ho, had given up trying to reach the building manager. He'd called 3 times. No answer. He tried the deputy director. No answer. He even considered triggering the fire alarm to force an automatic door unlock, but he knew that would cost him his job, and Jung-ho had a daughter in middle school and rent due in 9 days. So he did the only thing he could. He stood at the side door, holding it open just a crack, letting whatever heat he could funnel out toward the parking lot. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was all he had. Inside, Hwang was on his client call, laughing, talking about golf. The Yosu file was forgotten. Seo-yoon was forgotten. She was a problem he'd already solved in his mind. She'd either find the file or she'd quit. Either way, he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. Then the sound, low at first, a vibration more than a noise, the kind of deep mechanical rumble that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. Multiple engines, heavy vehicles, getting closer. Jung-ho heard it first. He stepped out of his booth and looked toward the parking lot entrance. Through the curtain of falling snow, he saw headlights. Not 1 pair, not 2, 12. Moving in a line, precise, deliberate. The way military convoys move. 12 black SUVs entered the parking lot in formation. No license plates. Tinted windows so dark they looked like holes cut in the night. They didn't screech. They didn't accelerate. They glided in with the calm of something that doesn't need to announce itself because its presence is the announcement. They stopped in a perfect semicircle around the building entrance. Engines running, headlights on. The snow caught in the beams looked like static on a broken screen. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Just the idling engines and the falling snow, and Seo-yoon standing in the middle of it all, looking at the convoy with an expression that was not surprise, not relief. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 3 years running from something and just realized that some things don't stop chasing you. They just learn to wait. Doors opened. Men stepped out. 8, 10, 12 of them. Black coats, black gloves. Oh, they moved with the kind of coordination that comes from training and repetition and the absolute certainty that whoever they work for does not tolerate mistakes. They weren't soldiers. They weren't thugs. They were something in between. Professionals from a world that exists just beneath the surface of the one you see every day. They didn't approach Seo-yoon. They fanned out. 2 at the building entrance, 2 at the side exit, 2 at the loading dock around back. They weren't there for her. They were there for the perimeter. Chishung stepped forward from the lead vehicle. He walked towards Seo-yoon without rushing. His face showed nothing. Not aggression, not urgency, just focus. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, removed his own coat, a heavy black wool overcoat that probably cost more than Jung-ho made in 2 months, and placed it over the security guard's jacket that was already on her shoulders. He didn't speak, didn't need to. She knew who he was. She'd known him for years. "Chi-seung," she said quietly. He bowed his head, just slightly, a gesture of respect that carried more weight than words. Then the last car door opened, and Park Do-jin stepped into the snow. He was wearing a dark coat over his black suit. No gloves, no scarf. The cold hit him the same way it hit everything else in that parking lot, hard and immediate. He didn't react to it. He didn't notice it, because the only thing in his field of vision was the woman standing 30 feet away, with frost on her eyelashes and blue on her lips. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow, with the pace of a man who has been walking toward this moment for 3 years and is not going to ruin it by rushing. Each step through the snow was deliberate, each breath visible in the frozen air. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, close enough to see the faint scar on her left wrist, close enough to see that her hands had stopped shaking, which meant she was worse off than she looked, close enough to see that despite everything, despite the cold and the humiliation and the 3 years of silence, her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, honest, unbroken. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her. He stood there in the snow with his hands at his sides and his heart in his throat, and he waited. Because even now, especially now, he would not cross a boundary she hadn't opened. He had promised her that once. He would keep that promise even in a snowstorm. She looked at him. 3 years. 3 years of new names and new cities and empty rooms and mornings where she woke up and reached across the bed for someone who wasn't there. 3 years of convincing herself she'd made the right choice. 3 years of being free in every way except the one that mattered. "You found me," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The cold had taken most of her volume, but the words were clear. "I never lost you." 4 words. That's all he said. But the weight of them pressed against the night like a hand against a dam. 3 years of silence, 3 years of distance, collapsed into 4 words that meant I was always there. I was always watching. I never stopped. He removed his coat, the one he was wearing. He placed it around her shoulders. But over Chi Seung's coat, over Jung Ho's jacket, layering warmth over her, like a man who would strip everything off his own back and stand naked in the blizzard if it meant she was warm. And Seo Yun, for the first time in 3 years, exhaled. Not the shallow mechanical breathing she'd been doing to conserve energy. A real exhale. Deep, shuddering. The kind that comes from a body finally letting go of a tension it's been holding so long it forgot it was there. She was safe. She knew it in her bones. Not because of the men or the vehicles or the display of power. Because of him. Because Dajin was here. And wherever Dojin was, harm could not follow. Then something shifted. Dojin turned his head, slowly, away from Seo Yun, toward the building. Through the glass front door, he could see the fluorescent lit office, the desks, the chairs. Then when a man standing near the window, coffee cup in hand, staring out at the parking lot with a face that was rapidly cycling through confusion, irritation, and the first cold fingers of fear. Director Hwang Jae-sung didn't know what he was looking at. He didn't recognize the vehicles. He didn't understand the formation. But some part of his brain, some ancient primate instinct buried beneath the entitlement and cruelty, understood that he was looking at a predator. And the predator was looking back. Dojin walked toward the building. His stride didn't change. His pace didn't quicken. He moved with the same measured cadence he used for everything. A man who understood that urgency is a form of weakness, and that true power moves at its own speed regardless of what the world wants. Chisung was already at the glass door. And he didn't break it. He didn't force it. He entered a code on the building's electronic lock panel, a code that the Gyeomjongpa's information network had obtained in the time it took the convoy to drive from Seoul to Incheon. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Chisung held the door open. Dajin walked through without breaking stride. The warm air hit him like a wall. After standing in -14, the 72-degree office felt almost tropical. But Dajin's face showed no reaction, no relief, no adjustment. He simply entered the space the way a man enters a room he already owns. The office was nearly empty. The half-staff Wednesday crew had mostly gone home. 2 junior employees were still at their desks near the far wall. They had seen the convoy pull up. They had watched from the window. And now they were watching a man in a black suit walk through their office with an energy that made the fluorescent lights feel dimmer. Director Hwang was standing behind his desk. He had put down his coffee. His client call was over. His phone was in his hand. though who he was planning to call was unclear. Security? Police? His wife? None of them would help. Dogian walked to Huang's desk, stopped on the other side of it, looked at the surface, the papers, the coffee cup, the framed photo of Huang shaking hands with a city councilman at a charity dinner, the small monuments of a small man's small life. He picked up the coffee cup, not aggressively, gently, almost casually. He looked at it for a moment, then set it down on the edge of the desk. Precisely, centered, where like a man who pays attention to details because details are the difference between control and chaos. Then he looked at Huang. Huang opened his mouth to speak. What came out was not the authoritative bark he used on employees. It was the thin, uncertain voice of a man who has just realized he is standing in the wrong room. Who are you? This is a private office. You can't just... You have a wife, Dojin said. His voice was quiet, conversational. The tone a man uses when ordering tea, not when dismantling a life. Her name is Huang Minjung, née Kang. You have two sons. One is 11, the other is 8. They attend Songdo International Academy. You have a mortgage on a house in Yeonsudong, 47 months remaining at 4.2% interest. You drive a leased Hyundai Genesis. You have a gambling debt of 62 million won at an unlicensed parlor in Bupyeonggu that you've been hiding from your wife's family for 14 months. Every word landed like a nail driven into wood. Clean, precise, a final. Huang's face went white, not pale, white. The color of a man watching his skeleton get pulled out of his body one bone at a time while he's still standing. How do you... The client file you accused her of losing, Dojin continued in exactly the same tone, as if Huang hadn't spoken, is in the third drawer of your deputy's desk, right side. It was misfiled on Tuesday afternoon at approximately 4:45 p.m. Your deputy moved it without logging the transfer. You knew that before you sent her outside. You didn't check because checking would have solved the problem. And solving the problem wasn't the point. The point was punishment. Huang's hand was gripping the back of his chair. His knuckles were white. You took a woman, Dojin said, and for the first time his voice changed, not louder but heavier, like each word was being pressed through iron. Who showed you nothing but competence and patience for 6 months? A woman who reorganized your databases, corrected your shipping errors, covered your mistakes with clients, and never once asked for recognition. You took that woman and you locked her out of this building in minus 14 degrees without a coat because it made you feel powerful. He paused. Let the silence do its work. Because you have never in your life had actual power, so you manufactured it. By hurting someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone who had no connections, no family, no voice. Someone you thought was alone in this world. Another pause, longer this time. A pause that felt like a door being sealed shut. But she doesn't need to fight back. That's what I'm for. Dojin nodded once. Chizung stepped forward and placed a folder on Huang's desk. Manila. Thick. Unmarked. Open it, Dojin said. Huang's hands were shaking so badly he could barely lift the cover. Inside were documents. Dozens of them. Printed on crisp white paper with timestamps and source codes and digital signatures. Financial records showing systematic embezzlement from Hanjin Global Logistics. Small amounts, skimmed over 2 years, totaling just over 190 million won. Money Huang had funneled into his gambling habit through a shell account he thought was untraceable. Records of 11 formal workplace harassment complaints filed by current and former employees. All of them buried by Huang through pressure, intimidation, or quiet payoffs that came from the company's discretionary budget. Copies of internal emails in which Huang took credit for projects completed by junior staff members, including 3 emails specifically referencing work done by Yoon Seo-yoon. And at the bottom of the folder, a formal legal filing, pre-drafted, ready for submission to the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office. All it needed was a date. Huang stared at the documents. His mouth moved but produced no sound. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor who had just heard the bolt slide. By tomorrow morning, Duggan said, you will resign from this company. You will cite personal reasons. You will not negotiate a severance package. You will not contact the board. You will simply leave. He let that settle. You will issue a formal written apology to every employee you have mistreated during your tenure here. There are 11 of them. We have their names, their current addresses, and their contact information. Each apology will be specific to the harm you caused them. Not generic, not templated, specific. He took one step closer to the desk. Just one. But it closed the distance in a way that made Huang's chair roll backward an inch. And you will never work in a management position in this city again. Not because I will prevent it, because this folder will be shared with every corporate recruiter, staffing agency, and board of directors in the Incheon metropolitan area the moment you try. Your career is over. Aqua Director Huang. The only variable is whether it ends quietly or whether it ends on the front page of every business publication in South Korea. He paused for the last time. And if you ever speak her name, think her name, or come within 200 meters of anywhere she exists on this earth, I will not come back to talk. That last sentence was not a threat. Threats are promises that might not be kept. This was a statement of fact, as certain and immovable as the ground beneath their feet. Huang's legs gave out. He didn't fall dramatically. He just sank into his chair, slowly, like a building settling into its own foundation after the supports have been removed. His eyes were fixed on the folder. His hands were on the desk. His career, his marriage, his financial security, his self-image, everything he had built on the backs of people he treated like furniture, was sitting in a manila folder on his desk, ready to ignite. Dojin turned, walked toward the door. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The room behind him was already a ruin. As he passed the two junior employees frozen at their desks, the ones who had watched through the glass as Seo Yun was locked outside and done nothing, Do-geon slowed. He didn't speak to them. He just looked, a single glance at each. Brief, expressionless, but weighted with something they would both carry for a very long time. The knowledge that they had watched, and they had chosen silence, and someone had noticed. At the side entrance, Dojin stopped in front of the security guard. Bai Jung-ho was standing at attention, not because anyone told him to, because some instinct in him recognized that the man in front of him deserved it. "What's your name?" Dojin asked. "Bai Jung-ho," the guard answered. His voice was steady despite everything. Dojin studied him. This 53-year-old man in a thin company jacket who had walked out into minus 14 degrees to give his coat to a woman he barely knew. Not because it was his job, not because anyone was watching, because it was right. "You're the only decent man in this building," Dojin said. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a card. Black, no name, just a phone number embossed in silver. "If you ever need work," Dojin said, placing the card in Youngho's hand, "call this number." Youngho looked at the card, then at Dojin, then at the card again. He nodded once. Dojin walked out into the snow. The convoy was still in formation, engines idling, snow accumulating on hoods and rooftops. Dojin walked back to the lead vehicle where Soyun was sitting in the back seat, wrapped in 3 layers of coats, a blanket that Chishung had produced from somewhere around her legs, the heat blasting at full. Dojong got in beside her, closed the door. The sound of the storm disappeared. Inside the vehicle, it was warm and quiet and smelled like leather and something faintly metallic that she remembered from years ago, the scent of his world. She looked at him. He looked straight ahead for a moment, then he turned to face her. They sat in the silence, not an awkward silence, the kind of silence that exists between two people who have said everything important to each other at least once before and know that the words are still there, still alive, still hanging in the space between them like constellations. "I told you not to find me," she said finally. "You told me not to follow you. I didn't. I just never stopped watching the sky for your signal. I didn't send a signal. Standing in a snowstorm with blue lips is a signal, Seo-yun. Even if you didn't mean it to be." She almost smiled. The muscles around her mouth twitched with it. Almost. Like a light flickering on in a house that's been dark for 3 years. "I left because I didn't want to be your weakness," she said. "You were never my weakness." He said it immediately, without hesitation, without having to think about it, because he'd had 3 years to think about it, and he'd arrived at this answer 10,000 times. You were the only thing that made the strength mean something. She looked down at her hands. They were still numb. She could barely feel her fingertips, but she could feel the warmth of the car and the weight of his presence beside her and the unbearable gravity of being near someone you've been orbiting for 3 years without touching. I can't go back to that life, Dajan. Her voice was steady but fragile, like ice over deep water. I won't live in safe houses. I won't look over my shoulder every time I walk to the grocery store. I won't be the reason you... I'm not asking you to go back, he said. I'm not asking you to come to Seoul. I'm not asking you to be part of the organization or live behind walls or change who you've become. He turned to face her fully. I'm asking you to let me stand next to you. Mine in whatever life you choose, wherever that is, however that looks. I'll show up, and I'll leave when you tell me to, and I'll come back when you let me. That's all. She didn't answer, not with words. She reached across the seat, slowly, like someone reaching for something precious that they're afraid might disappear. And she took his hand, his scarred knuckles, her fingers lacing between his, the same way they looked in the photograph she'd been carrying in her wallet for 3 years. She held on, and he held back, and neither of them let go. The convoy pulled out of the parking lot, 12 black SUVs moving in formation through the falling snow. Inside the lead vehicle, two people who had spent 3 years apart sat in the back seat holding hands in the dark, driving towards something that didn't have a name yet but felt, who were for the first time in a long time, like the beginning of something instead of the end. Director Hwang Jae-sung resigned the following morning. He walked into the office at 7 a.m. before anyone else arrived, typed a 3-sentence resignation letter, left it on the operations manager's desk, and walked out. He didn't take his coffee cup. He didn't take the framed photo with the city councilman. He didn't take anything. The embezzlement case became public 11 days later when an anonymous filing arrived at the district prosecutor's office. The investigation lasted 4 months. Hwang lost his pension, his house in Yeonsudong, and his wife, who discovered the gambling debts in the process and filed for divorce before the indictment was even handed down. As the two junior employees who had watched Seo-yoon get locked outside and said nothing, both submitted anonymous written apologies to the company's human resources department within the same week. Separate letters, unprompted. Neither knew the other had written one. They weren't addressed to Seo-yoon by name. They were addressed to the secretary who deserved better. She never read them, but they were written, and sometimes writing the truth down, even when no one reads it, is the first step toward becoming someone who doesn't look away next time. Bae Jung-ho, the security guard, called the number on the black card 3 weeks later. He was offered a position as logistics manager for a legitimate import company with connections to the Gyeomjong-pa's legal business operations. Better pay, benefits, a schedule that let him pick his daughter up from school twice a week. He took the job and never looked back. And Seo-yoon, Yoon Seo-yeon, did not return to the underworld. She did not move to Seoul. She did not become a figure in the Gyeomjongpa's orbit again. She moved to a small coastal town south of Busan. She rented a narrow 2-story building on a quiet street near the harbor. She painted the walls herself, seafoam green, and she opened a bookshop. It was small, 12 shelves, a reading corner with 2 mismatched armchairs, a window that looked out onto the sea. She stocked it with novels and poetry collections and secondhand books with notes in the margins from strangers who had loved them first. She called it the hallway, and only one person in the world understood why. And Dajan? Park Dojin? The man who ran a shadow empire across 4 countries? The man who could sit in a room with the most dangerous people in East Asia and make them feel like they were the ones in danger? That man drove to a small coastal town south of Busan every single weekend. He parked his black car outside her bookshop, walked in, said hello to the cat she'd adopted, a ginger tabby that slept on the poetry shelf, sat down in the armchair by the window, and read whatever she recommended. He stayed until closing. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes she made coffee and they sat across from each other and said nothing, and it was the most honest conversation either of them had all week. He never asked her to come back. She never asked him to stay away. He didn't propose. She didn't demand promises. They simply existed in each other's lives with the quiet certainty of two people who had already survived the worst thing they could do to each other, which was walk away, and had decided independently, separately, across 3 years and 600 miles of silence, that they were done surviving apart. Some loves don't need a ceremony. They don't need a label or a contract or a public declaration. They just need two people who chose each other once and never stopped choosing, even when choosing meant standing still, even when choosing meant letting go, even when choosing meant driving through a snowstorm at 160 kilometers per hour, because the only person who ever made the world make sense was standing in the cold, and the rest of the world was doing nothing. People think power is about controlling others. It's not. Power is what you do when someone you love is standing in the cold and the whole world is watching and doing nothing. Power is the man who shows up, not to own her, not to cage her, not to drag her back into a life she left on purpose, but to wrap his coat around her shoulders and say 4 words that carry the weight of 3 years of silence. I never lost you. That's power. That's love. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll find someone who holds both in the same hands. If this story just reminded you what real loyalty looks like, hit subscribe right now. We drop stories like this every single week, stories that stay in your chest long after the video ends. And send this to one person who needs to hear it today, because someone out there is standing in their own snowstorm and they need to know that the right person is on their way.